Hi, everyone. Please let me know if you can hear me and see me in the chat box to the right. That would be great. I just like to make sure that everything's going smoothly. Okay, thanks, Robert. Great. Wonderful. We've got a couple of you here. Great, okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining in. Looks like everyone so far hasn't had an issue. We've got people, someone from Moose Jaw in Quebec. That's wonderful. Feel free to let me know where you're joining in from. I always do find that interesting. It's great to see people from all over the country. It's wonderful. Okay, so we are going to pretty much jump right in. This is a bit of a longer one. I've got lots of information for you here today. This was a requested webinar topic by multiple individuals who attended my Focus on Protein presentation a couple weeks back. Let me know if you were, present for that presentation. That would be great to kind of have an idea of how many people are here that were there for that one as well. There will be some touching on similar topics when we talk about protein, but the goal of this one in particular is to focus on all of the other different aspects of a vegetarian or a vegan diet and what you should be looking out for if you are interested in following this type of diet, what some of the benefits are, but also what some of the risks might be. And so we'll take a look at both sides from a very neutral point of view and go from there in terms of this type of diet. So great, it looks like quite a few of you did attend the protein presentation. That's wonderful. We will be talking about protein again in this one because it is very relevant, but we'll try to breeze through that section since I assume that quite a few of you were present for that one. And then we'll dive into some of the other nutrients that are really important to consider for a vegetarian and vegan diet. Okay, so quick introduction for me. My name's Madison Walsh. If you haven't already joined a webinar with me, then welcome. I work out of CFB Halifax. I'm a health promotion specialist there. By trade, I'm a registered dietitian, and I also have a master's of public health that I obtained at the University of Toronto. So that's a bit about my educational background. If you have been present in all of my webinars so far, I do usually see quite a few repeat names. So I assume some of you have probably been regulars with me, which is great. Then you'll know that I tend to talk a lot about nutrition because that is my favorite topic and favorite thing to discuss being a dietitian. So we will be talking more about food today, and hopefully you guys enjoy this particular webinar. So before we get started, just a few things that, again, we're required to go over every time. So just as a reminder that this presentation is the property of D&D, and so please don't try to reproduce this presentation by taking photos or videos and recreating it. Also, use your own discretion if you have children in the house with you. These webinars are all intended for an adult audience, so make your own decisions there. Please understand as well that we're using privacy with this, so anything that anyone shares in the chat will be public for everyone who's attending to see, but it won't be in the recording. So these are recorded, and they will be available on calfconnection.ca. I'm going to drop a link in the chat bar for you guys right now in case you haven't seen it before. The Kingston Health Promotion website has a really great list of the previous webinars that have occurred, and this one will eventually get added to that list so that some other people who have missed it live can go back and watch it, or you can go rewatch it or recommend it to your friends or whatever you'd like to do. So just so that you know that it is being recorded, but not anything that you put in the chat, that's only for the live session. So feel free to use the chat anytime. It's open there for you to ask questions whenever you like. I'll try to answer the questions as we go along, and we'll have time at the end for a few questions as well. As I said at the beginning, though, this is one of probably my lengthier presentations because there's a lot to talk about. and I do tend to be chatty for those of you who have attended webinars with me before. So I'm going to try to keep it under an hour. We may go over a little bit, especially if there's a lot of questions. So I'll do my best to answer them all, but just know that we are kind of on a bit of a time crunch as well. So we'll try to get it all in, and hopefully you'll learn lots. Okay, so we are going to do a quick poll. Most of you probably are familiar with these by now, so just let me know what your affiliation with the CAF is. I just appreciate that for statistics purposes. It's completely anonymous, so it will not in any way be linked to your name. I can't even see who is answering which part, so it's completely anonymous, but we do really appreciate it if everyone who is attending could answer all of our polls. There will be a couple more at the end, so please do stick around and don't sign out early before we've done those polls, because it's really great for us to have full stats on everyone who's attended and get all of your feedback. It's really valuable for us. So looks like most people have answered that one. There's now only one who have not, so please just make sure that you answer it at some point before the end of this presentation. There we go, looks like we've got 100 now. Wonderful, thank you so much. All right, okay, so that kind of brings us right into our vegetarian and vegan diet. I'm gonna now turn off my video like I normally do, just so that you can see the PowerPoint a bit more clearly and read it a little easier, because it'll make it bigger. And I'll pop back on at the end to answer any questions. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that. You should let me know if there's any issues going on with that, but hopefully everything's clear. Okay, so we'll start out with just a quick definition of what we're talking about. Most people, I think, already know this, but just to be clear, when we say vegetarian diet, we mean that someone is abstaining from all types of meat, but they still do consume some types of animal products. For example, dairy products like milk or cheese or yogurt, and often eggs as well, but no actual meat from an animal. There's a few subcategories of a vegetarian diet, but when we're referring to a vegetarian diet, we'll include all of them. But for example, there's the lacto-ovo vegetarian diet, where they avoid both meat and fish, but they consume dairy and eggs. Lacto-vegetarian, which is just dairy products but no eggs. And ovo-vegetarian, which is when they would consume eggs but no dairy. There's also the pescatarian diet, which is when someone would eat no meat, but they would eat fish. So no red meat or poultry, but they would consume fish and seafood. So kind of a few different variations on the idea, but overall, in the general sense, it does mean that you're not consuming any meat, but you are still consuming some type of animal products, whatever that category is for you. On the other hand, when we're saying a vegan diet, we're saying that you're abstaining from all animal products. So no meats, no eggs, no dairy, and that's kind of the general idea for a vegan diet. I see we have a question there asking if fish is for vegetarian. So a typical vegetarian diet, you would not be eating fish, but if you would consider yourself a pescatarian, that's kind of the label that's used for if you do eat fish. But you could, it still falls under the vegetarian diet. It's just a subtype if you are consuming fish. So that's a minor difference there. Okay, so I want to do another poll. This one's not for statistics. This one's just for fun. So only answer if you want to, but it is anonymous. I would love to know if you are currently following a vegetarian or vegan diet based on the definitions that I just shared there. So the poll is there if you want to give that an answer. And I just want to know kind of what we're going with in terms of, if people are just interested in the diet, or if they're already following it and want to learn more, it would be helpful to know that. So it looks like we do have a few. We've got 7 vegetarians so far, 2 vegans, and 9 who are not doing either. So that's pretty much what I expected. I expected we'd have less vegans. And I was actually hoping that we would have some that weren't following either, because it is really interesting to learn about, even if you're not following these diets, or even if you have no intention of following these diets. It is still really valuable to kind of have an idea of what they are, and see if you maybe have the desire to experiment later on with eating more plant-based proteins. And we'll talk a lot about those options here in a bit. So thanks so much for kind of giving me that info. All right, so we have a comment there, flexitarian. Lisa, thanks for mentioning that. I think flexitarian is just kind of when you're generally quite flexible about your food intake and what you consume. I'm not actually sure of the exact definition of flexitarian, but it's not one that I'm super familiar with, but it is, I think, a different version of the vegetarian diet. Okay, so we'll talk first about the benefits. So there are quite a few benefits of a vegetarian or vegan diet, but of course they all don't happen overnight. So just because you stop eating meat one day is not going to mean that all of a sudden you're going to have all these benefits happen to you right away. It's really important to plan and include a variety of foods and make your diet, whatever it is, part of an overall healthy lifestyle. So incorporating it into a healthy lifestyle that also includes physical activity and, following guidelines from Health Canada and all of that. So making sure that it's not just that you're dropping meat out of your diet and thinking that everything's going to be better. It's not always that simple. So benefits include lower saturated fat intake because you're consuming less meat and animal products, which tend to be higher in saturated fat. And if you're unfamiliar with the types of fats, then I would encourage you to go back and watch my Focus on Fat webinar. We talk a lot about those different types in that one. You would also see lower cholesterol levels. Very often, vegetarians or vegans do have lower blood cholesterol levels as a result of eating less meat. And when you're eating foods that are plant-based, you naturally typically you would have a diet that's higher in fiber and complex carbohydrates because of all of the whole grains and fruits and vegetables that you're consuming on a fairly regular basis. So if you're eating more of those types of foods, and your legumes and lentils and all of those types of things, then you're going to have more fiber, which is really great for your health. And I talk a lot about fiber and complex carbohydrates in the Focus on Carbohydrates webinar. So again, if you missed those, they're really great, and I'd recommend that you go back and watch those if you're interested. We also see possible reduced risk of certain chronic diseases. So for example, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and certain types of cancers. These are not, of course, a guarantee, however. So just because you stop eating meat and follow a vegetarian or vegan diet does not mean that you're going to completely eliminate the risk of these types of things. It's just that there is an association with lower instances of these diseases in people who follow these types of diets. And there's certain studies that say that this is the case. There's always going to be other people that are going to argue the other way. So just know that it's a possible reduced risk. It's not a guarantee. Some people also use vegetarian or vegan diets as a weight management strategy. And it can be effective in reducing rates of obesity and maintaining a healthy weight. So if that's something that you're interested in, that may be a reason for you to try to eat more plant-based protein. And another kind of added bonus that's not really directly related to your own health is that plant-based diets tend to be more environmentally sustainable. Again, there's always lots of arguments around these types of things, and some people say one thing and some people say another. But the general consensus is that eating more plants is more sustainable in the long run and more environmentally friendly, I guess you could say. That being said, I'm certainly not an expert in environmental issues, so there's lots more to be said on that topic, and I'm not diving into that today. But typically, that's kind of the way that people view these types of diets. Okay. That being said, of course, there's always risks with any dietary change that you're going to be following. So really one of the key risks of following a vegan or vegetarian diet is that there is a significant potential for nutrient deficiencies, and it's sometimes harder to meet your body's needs for certain types of nutrients. So this is actually where I'm going to really focus on this presentation. We're going to go through 5 different types of nutrients, well actually 6, I've included 2 in one of the categories. So 6 different types of nutrients that it can be more difficult to obtain on a vegan or vegetarian diet, and the reasons why, and the ways that you could perhaps try to consume more if you were following this diet to make sure that you meet your needs. So that's a really big one, making sure that you're getting all of the essential vitamins and minerals in your diet is really important for overall health, and it can sometimes be more challenging if you're cutting out meat and animal products. So that's something that we're going to focus on today. The other point that I'd like to make is that sometimes vegetarian and vegan products, so things that are made and packaged to be vegetarian or vegan, can be highly processed and can contain higher levels of salt or sugar or fat. Of course, this is only if you're eating those processed types of foods. So if you're following a more, fruit and vegetable and whole grain based diet, then this won't be an issue. But if you're choosing to consume the processed, packaged vegetarian or vegan foods, then just make sure that you're aware that you're reading the labels and being aware that they sometimes are higher in things that are less desirable. So for example, I won't get too deep into this, but the Beyond Meat burger is a really popular discussion point as of late. It's a very big topic, and it is higher in sodium than, say, a typical hamburger with actual meat. So that's just one example. These types of things like the Beyond Meat burger, they are usually made of highly processed ingredients and not necessarily whole foods. So just because something says that it's vegan or vegetarian does not necessarily mean that it's healthy or even a healthier option than the meat alternative. So keeping that in mind, that's not to say that that negates any of the benefits. And it's really, it's still really great to increase your intake of plant-based proteins, but just being aware that just because something has that label on it does not make it healthy all of the time. All right, so with that being said, we're going to dive into our 5 different categories of nutrients that can be more difficult to obtain on a vegan or vegetarian diet, and we'll go in depth for each one of them. So we're going to start out with protein. Like I said, we talked a bit about vegetarian diets with protein in the protein webinar a couple weeks ago. We'll mention it again today. We will then talk about vitamin B12, iron, omega-3 fatty acids, and I've put calcium and vitamin D together in the same category because they kind of do go hand in hand. So those are the 5 main topics that we're going to cover today, and how it is a little bit more difficult to get these nutrients when following a vegan and vegetarian diet, and how we can try to obtain more of them, what kind of foods have them that you can consume on these types of diets, and why it is a bit more difficult to obtain. So we'll jump right in and get started with protein. So number 1 is protein. What is protein? It's a macronutrient. It's one of the 3 macronutrients along with fat and carbohydrates. And it has a lot of different roles, but in a nutshell, it basically helps with the growth and repair of body cells, including your muscles, and also has a role in hormone and antibody and enzyme formation. So it's really, really important and very necessary that we get adequate protein in our diets. So when we look at Canada's food guide, just to point out that a quarter of the plate on Canada's food guide is called protein foods. So pretty much at every meal, you want to make sure that you're including protein foods, and typically it should take about a quarter of your plate. So with that being said, there is a focus in Canada's food guide, especially the newer version, which is this one here that's pictured. There is a focus on including more plant-based proteins in your diet. And you can even see there in the picture, there's lots of different plant-based proteins. There's some tofu, lots of legumes and nuts and seeds. So they're really trying to promote increasing our intake of plant-based proteins. And that's for all of the reasons that I just went over when I talked about the benefits of vegetarian or vegan diets. There is a lot of similar benefits just by including more of your plant-based proteins. So it's not like you have to completely cut out meat to be able to get those benefits. All you have to do is just, increase your intake of these types of plants, and perhaps decrease your intake of certain types of meats and have them maybe just a little bit less often than you're used to, and you will see health benefits like the ones that I just discussed. So I'm going to go through for each one of these nutrients. We're going to talk about the sources, and I've purposefully excluded non-vegetarian or non-vegan sources. So of course there are sources that come from meat and animal products. And I'm not talking about those ones today. Because of course, with protein, the first thing that comes to mind is your meats, your poultry, your fish, and those things are not vegetarian or vegan. So we're not going to include those in our list, but of course they are absolutely sources of protein. The way I've divided it as well is I have a list here for vegetarian and a list for vegan. The vegetarian one would also include everything that's in the vegan one, but the vegan one would not include what's in the list for vegetarian, because a vegan would not consume animal-based products. So instead of copying the long list under vegan, under vegetarian as well, I've just kind of simplified it this way. But of course, it's important to know that anything that a vegan can eat, then a vegetarian could eat it as well. So with that being said, hopefully that makes sense. If you have any questions about how I've arranged it, then please feel free to ask. But we'll just go through. So vegetarian sources. So non-meat animal sources is kind of what I focused on here in this list. So we have things like cow's milk, yogurt, cheese, and eggs. Those are all really great sources of protein. But of course, they are coming from animals. So if you're a vegetarian, you may or may not be willing to consume these. But if you're vegan, then you wouldn't be, because that's kind of the definition of being a vegan. So a vegetarian would also be able to eat the same things that a vegan would be eating to get their protein, which includes legumes. So that's your lentils, your beans, things like that. Nuts and seeds, soy products, which would include things like tofu or soy milk. Your whole grains have small amounts of protein, and even smaller amounts are found in your fruit and vegetables. So there are some amounts of protein in those last two categories, the whole grains and the fruits and vegetables. Although it's not particularly high, you do still get small amounts. So some examples of vegetables that have slightly higher amounts of protein than some other vegetables would include typically your darker, leafier vegetables like broccoli, spinach, asparagus, artichokes. In addition, some root vegetables like potatoes or sweet potatoes would have slightly higher levels of protein, but again, it's quite minimal when you compare it to other things like your soy products, nuts and seeds, and legumes. So there is quite a big variety there of different ways that we can get protein as a vegetarian or as a vegan. So I'm just going to touch on this again. We did talk about it in our Focus on Protein webinar. It's the concept of complete and incomplete proteins. So basically what we mean when we say a complete protein is it means that it's a protein that has all of the essential amino acids. And essential amino acids are basically just, amino acids in general are building blocks of protein. And the ones that are essential, it just means that we have to get them in our diet because our body is not capable of making them itself. So if you're consuming a food that is considered a complete protein, you know that it has all of the essential amino acids that your body needs. However, these complete proteins typically could occur mainly in animal proteins. So your meat, poultry, fish, dairy, and eggs. There are some plant sources that are complete proteins. For example, quinoa, tofu, and tempeh, like those soy type products. Hemp seeds and chia seeds, those are just a few examples of complete proteins from plants, but there aren't as many, and they're not always as easily obtained. So what does that mean in terms of, if you're a vegetarian or a vegan, how would you make sure that you're getting all of your essential amino acids? Well, it would typically come, your amino acids and your protein would come from the plant proteins that you're consuming. And these ones are called incomplete proteins because they don't have all of the amino acids in the right amount. So they just don't necessarily have enough of all of them. And that's called having a limiting amino acid, meaning that there's probably one or maybe more amino acids that particular food is lower in. So it may not have the amount that your body needs. However, most plant proteins do still have all 9 amino acids. And the good news is that we can eat all kinds of different varieties of different foods. So when we do that, it's what's called complementary proteins. So if you are a vegetarian or a vegan, all you have to do to make sure that you get all of your essential amino acids is create your own complete proteins by combining foods together, or basically just eating a variety of plant proteins to make sure that you get all of the essential amino acids. So for example, legumes and grains are good ones to pair because they kind of complement each other in that maybe your legumes is low in one amino acid, but the grain is high in that amino acid. So if you eat them together, then you're going to make sure you get all of them. Same thing with legumes and nuts and seeds as an example. So peanuts are legumes, so peanut butter and whole grain toast would be a good example of combining legumes and grains, like pictured there. But the other piece of good news, which is a bit of a newer finding, is that we know that we don't have to eat complementary proteins together. So we can actually, just make sure that we're eating a variety every single day to make sure that we're getting all of our amino acids and making sure that you are consuming these different types. But it's not necessary for them to be consumed together in the exact same meal at the exact same time, because your body does have the ability to kind of, just consume each different type throughout the day, and then over time you've consumed enough to meet your body's needs. So that's a really convenient way to do it, is just making sure that you have a variety of different protein foods all day, every day kind of thing. And that should make sure that you get all of the protein that you need. So in terms of how much protein you need, the requirement or recommendation is that it should comprise of about 10 to 35% of your total daily calories, which usually equates to approximately 0.8 grams per kilogram per day. So if you know your weight in kilograms, then you can figure out how many grams for each kilogram per day. So it would depend on how much you weigh in order to do that calculation. So that's kind of the average requirement. It can be more for elite athletes or someone who's very active. It can go possibly up to 2 grams per kilogram per day. But for the average person who's not overly active, it's about 0.8. So based on all of this, the question often comes, do I need a protein supplement if I'm on a vegetarian or a vegan diet? Oftentimes the good news is that no, you likely do not require a protein supplement, although it of course depends on the individual and it depends on your diet and your ability to eat a varied diet of different types of plant-based protein. So if you're not able to access a varied all kinds of types of plants and different proteins, then you may require one. But for the most part, if you eat a variety of protein-rich foods of the types that we just discussed, either vegetarian or vegan sources, then you can likely get enough protein by eating these foods, even if you don't consume meat, which is really great. And it's important to note that if you do think that you need a supplement, you should talk to a healthcare professional, because your body actually does not have the ability to store extra protein. So you only need to make sure that you have enough protein every day to meet those needs of approximately 0.8 grams per kilogram of your body weight. Because if you exceed that, then since your body doesn't know how to store protein, it will convert it to fat and store it as fat instead. And typically, in my experience, most people want to avoid that. So if that's not your desired outcome, then you want to make sure that you're not consuming extra protein. That being said, if you are a vegetarian or vegan, you definitely need to focus on making sure that you're getting enough by eating a variety of high protein foods like the ones that we just talked about. So always, always, always talk to someone in healthcare, like your doctor or dietitian, if you're concerned about your protein intake. But I would not recommend taking a supplement without talking to someone, just to make sure that you actually do need it if you're concerned. All right, so just again to drive this point home, it is absolutely possible to get enough protein. You just have to eat a variety of sources. So just to remind you again, if you're vegetarian and willing to eat animal sources that are not meat, then you can eat lots of eggs, cheese, yogurt, and milk. And for additional protein as a vegetarian, or for your main sources of protein as a vegan, you would be looking at beans, lentils, peas, tofu, nuts, and seeds as the highest sources of protein. And then you can also supplement with vegetables and grain products, which also contain very small amounts of protein to kind of help boost your levels. I see we have a question here from Dawn. Do I eat the amount of protein for the weight I am or the weight I should be? Typically, it's the weight that you are. Yeah, so that's usually what the recommendation is, because you want to make sure that you're not depriving yourself of protein. That would be the more important aspect. And another question from David, is there a difference in the absorption rates between meat and non-meat protein sources, or how the body breaks them down? If so, what mechanisms can be used to overcome this? Yeah, so that's a really good question. There really isn't a whole lot of difference other than the fact that, like I said, we have our complete versus incomplete proteins. But as long as you're consuming all types of protein, then you're fine. So making sure that you're including a variety, that's really the key. You don't need to worry too much about how they're being broken down and how they're absorbed, as long as you're eating all of the types of amino acids by consuming a variety of protein sources, of vegetarian or vegan sources, then for the most part you should be completely fine. Hopefully that clears that up. Another comment from David here. You mentioned the amount of protein by body weight. Is there a breakdown of amounts? No, not really. I assume you mean like in terms of the amounts of each amino acid. I mean, you could probably look into that in detail, but for the most part, as long as you're consuming all types of vegan and vegetarian sources, depending on which diet you're following, and including a variety, then you're going to be pretty well getting enough essential amino acids in all of your types. So I wouldn't worry too much about that. Okay, and then there's another question. Is seitan? I honestly don't even know how to pronounce that word. Is it good for you? So I'm pretty sure that's a wheat protein, right? Or a wheat gluten. Yeah, it's wheat gluten. So yeah, I mean, it definitely, there's no concern with wheat gluten in general. The gluten-free diet and all of the basis behind all that would be definitely a whole nother webinar, and I don't want to get too much into that because we have lots more to cover in terms of vegetarian and vegan diets without going into gluten. But the takeaway is that unless you have celiac disease or an intolerance to gluten, then it's nothing to worry about. Gluten is absolutely a fine thing to eat for most people unless you have one of those issues. So unless you think that you are potentially sensitive to gluten, then I wouldn't worry about it. Okay. Yeah, so we'll move on from that so that we can get into our next nutrient. So vitamin B12 is the next one that we're going to talk about. And I think this is a really important one to talk about for a number of reasons. It's probably one of the most difficult topics and nutrient for individuals to consume and get enough of when they're on a vegan or vegetarian diet. So vitamin B12 is a vitamin that's involved in the mechanisms of every single cell in the body. It's really, really important for us to make sure that we're consuming enough vitamin B12 because it plays a lot of roles in energy metabolism and supports the functioning of all of your cells in the body. If you don't get enough vitamin B12, then it can result in a certain type of anemia as a result of not having enough vitamin B12. So that's obviously something that we want to avoid at all costs, and we want to make sure that we're consuming adequate levels. So vitamin B12 occurs naturally only in animal products, and it's made by microorganisms. So as a result of that, it's not naturally present in our plant foods or our plant protein sources. So if you're following a strict vegan diet and not consuming animal products, then you're basically going to have a very hard time eating enough vitamin B12 because of the fact that it is not naturally present in your plant-based protein. So here are a few ways that you can consume different types of foods to increase your intake. So when we talk about vegetarian sources, if you are eating certain animal foods, then you could get B12 from milk, yogurt, cheese, and eggs. If you're not consuming those, then you'd have to turn to other alternatives. And for the most part, you're looking at fortified foods. So all of the foods in this list would be fortified with vitamin B12. So that would mean cereals, certain non-dairy milks, nutritional yeast, and sometimes meat alternatives like soy meat alternatives. Those types of foods are often fortified with vitamin B12. You can find that out easily by checking the food labels, but these are some of the main categories of different foods that that contain vitamin B12, and they are fortified with it. That's a great question, Julia. I think I actually mentioned that a little bit later on, so I'll just pause on that one because I think I do talk about it, and we'll get into the source of fortification. So your requirements for B12 is 2.4 micrograms a day for men and women. And here we go. So fortification, similar to supplementation. So when you ask what the source used for fortification, it would be kind of the same idea as what they use to make actual B12 supplements. So when we're looking at supplements, it's an interesting question because if you're a strict vegan, then you're probably not going to want to consume a supplement of something that's made out of any type of animal product or byproduct. So you want to make sure that the B12 supplement that you're consuming is vegetarian or vegan. So since it is made from the microorganisms, then if we extract the B12 from microorganisms itself, then typically that is considered to be accepted by the vegetarian or vegan community. So if instead of getting it from the animal itself, we're getting it from the microorganism, and that's really the only way that we can obtain B12, and that's, I guess, as close as you can come to making sure that it's vegetarian or vegan friendly. So that's kind of the simplified version, is that basically we're getting it from the microorganism itself. All right, so whether or not you need a B12 supplement, it is, of course, always best to get as much of your vitamins and minerals as you can from your food. But if you think that you're struggling to get enough through food, if you're feeling like you're not able to find fortified foods in your area, or it's just not something, maybe those foods are not something you enjoy and you don't think that you're getting enough, then it may be time to consider a vitamin B12 supplement. But again, same thing with protein. Always, always, always make sure that you talk to a healthcare provider, whether that's a dietitian or your family physician, before you start any type of supplementation, just to make sure that it's right for you and that you actually do need it, and also that it doesn't interact with anything else that you're taking in the form of medications or other supplements. So it's always a good idea to check in. But this definitely may be something that vegetarians or vegans may decide that they want to supplement, just to make sure that they're getting enough. Okay, so that wraps up vitamin B12, and now we're going to move on to iron. So iron is another really big one that we talk a lot about when we're discussing vegan and vegetarian diets. Because typically people think of, when they think of iron, they think of your animal sources. As you can see in this picture, there's quite a few different types of meat, but there also is quite a few vegetarian sources. So there definitely do exist. You just need to kind of work a little bit harder to make sure that you find the iron. So we'll quickly go over what iron is. It's a mineral, and it's essential to our body and to our health because it's an important component of hemoglobin, which is what carries it basically is the substance within your red blood cells that carries oxygen from your lungs to all of your body cells, so that your body has oxygen at all times and that all your cells can do whatever it is that they do on a regular basis. So making sure that your body functions properly all the time. So there's two types of iron, heme and non-heme. And there's plant and animal sources. And we're going to talk about the difference between heme and non-heme, and which type of source those two types come from. So heme iron is the type of iron that comes from animal products, whereas non-heme iron comes from plants. And I won't go into too much about the super scientific differences between the two, but what's really important to know for you guys is that heme iron, which comes from animal products, is quite a bit better absorbed by the body than non-heme or plant sources of iron. So you end up getting less iron and less absorption when you're consuming only plant sources of iron as opposed to animal sources. So that is part of the reason why it's a hot topic to discuss iron when we're talking about vegan and vegetarian diets. So here are some different sources that you can get iron if you're following a vegetarian or vegan diet. Again, all of these sources would be providing non-heme iron as the source of iron. So if you're a vegetarian, you can consume eggs, as well as all of these other things on the right for a vegan. So a vegan could consume fortified cereals and grains. So similar to what we talked about with B12, there's lots of different cereals that are fortified with iron in order to make it easier for people to consume or to get enough iron. Soy products are another big one that are sometimes fortified. Certain legumes, nuts and seeds, some vegetables and fruit. I see someone said plums. So yeah, definitely there's vegetables and fruits out there that do contain certain levels of non-heme iron. They're not necessarily the highest sources, but they definitely have some. And dark chocolate actually is another one that contains iron. And I'll just say again, with these lists, they're by no means exhaustive. So like, I appreciate you guys, adding in your own thoughts. That's great. But just know that it's not that I forgot these different types of things. It's just that there's so many different sources, and some of them have more than others. So I tried to focus on including the higher sources, but there's absolutely lots of other ones out there that I haven't included. So you can always look into those other ones on your own as well. And David, I see that you have pointed out, which is a really great point. I appreciate you bringing that up, about cooking with a cast iron skillet. So this is actually something that a lot of people are surprised about, but you absolutely can get additional iron when you cook your food in a cast iron skillet. So if it's not something that you already have and you're following a vegan or vegetarian diet, I'd highly recommend that you invest in a cast iron skillet. Basically, it's just a type of frying pan that's made out of iron instead of like the typical non-stick type of frying pan that most of us probably use. And if you use those to cook your food, then some of the iron, every time you cook, leaches out from the pan and into your food. And therefore, you actually do get a little bit of extra iron. So that's a really good point. Thank you so much for bringing that up, David. And Brenda is mentioning vitamin C. So that's really great. We actually are going to talk about that here literally right now. So thank you for bringing that up. So yes, absolutely. Vitamin C is a great way to increase the absorption of non-heme iron. So if you are only consuming plant products and you're only getting non-heme, which is less well absorbed than heme, one way that you can try to increase that absorption is by consuming vitamin C in addition to your whatever it is that you're eating that has iron in it. So foods, I think we all kind of know that typically your citrus fruits have lots of vitamin C, but there's lots of other foods that have vitamin C, not just your oranges and lemons and limes and such. So lots of other fruits and vegetables, berries, tomatoes, peppers, broccoli, the list goes on and on. So try to consume these types of citrus foods in addition to your iron food sources at the same time, ideally, to really increase that absorption. So for example, if you're having a spinach salad, spinach does contain some iron, then you might want to have little mandarin slices in that salad, which is a really common type of salad actually for that reason. So you're going to increase your absorption there. Or for example, eating pasta with tomato sauce, or having orange juice with your oatmeal. So lots of different ways that you can increase your absorption by combining these types of foods. Brenda, I see you're asking about oxalates. So yeah, those can inhibit absorption. We're going to talk about some things that can inhibit in a minute. So hold on to that question. And I see there's a question about iron supplements, and it looks like David has answered that for me, which is true. You can get either heme or non-heme iron. So it's available in both types. Okay. So here we go. We're talking about decreasing absorption. I actually don't have oxalates on this list, but it definitely is included in there. So thank you, Brenda, for bringing that one up. So some different substances, like these ones on the list, as well as oxalates, do potentially impair the absorption of your non-heme iron. So kind of on the opposite side of your vitamin C, if you're consuming these types of foods with your iron foods, then it could potentially decrease your absorption. So anything that has calcium can have this effect. Bran fiber as well. Lectins, which are found in legumes and whole grains. Phytates, which are also found in whole grains, seeds, legumes, and nuts. And tannins, which are found in tea and coffee and legumes. So I see earlier, Dawn, you had said to avoid coffee or caffeine. That's a really good point. So same thing with tea. If you are trying to increase your iron absorption, then maybe at least try to have your coffee or tea at a time when you're not eating your foods that have iron, because otherwise you may be inhibiting the absorption by consuming those at the same time. All right, so quickly, the requirements for iron: 8 milligrams a day for men, 18 milligrams a day for women. Women do have a higher need. Women are much more likely to be low in iron. There's a couple reasons for this, one of which is menstruation. So as a result, we do need higher levels of iron than men. So those kind of are the numbers if you're interested in knowing that. And do we need a supplement? So this is a very repetitive slide from my B12 slide. It basically says the same thing. It's always better to get vitamins and minerals as much as possible from your food, but it is sometimes needed to take a supplement if you struggle to get enough through food. So if you think that you might not be consuming enough of those types of foods that we just discussed, especially if you're following a vegan or vegetarian diet, you may want to consider a supplement. And if you do, then make sure you just talk to your healthcare provider before you start. Okay. So next up is omega-3. So this one is probably less commonly thought about when we discuss a vegetarian or vegan diet, but I thought it was important to mention because it can potentially be more difficult to obtain enough omega-3 if you're not eating animal products. All right, so omega-3 is a polyunsaturated fatty acid. So again, if you don't know what that means, then I'd recommend going back and watching the Focus on Fats webinar. But basically, polyunsaturated acids are part of the unsaturated fats group, and so they're the healthier type of fat as opposed to saturated fat. And there's 3 different types. They all have fancy names, but we like to just call them ALA, EPA, and DHA. So ALA is one of the essential fatty acids, so our bodies need to get it from food, and we find this in a lot of our different plant oils. Then we have EPA and DHA, which are pretty much exclusively found in marine oils, so that means your seafood. So if you're following a vegetarian or vegan diet and you're not eating any type of fish or seafood, you're likely to be lower in EPA and DHA. The good news is our body does have the ability to take ALA from our plant oils and create EPA and DHA, because as I just pointed out, ALA is the only one that's essential. The other 2 our bodies can make, and we do that by using ALA. So it is possible for you to create some, but it's not a very efficient mechanism, and it is still better to make sure that you're consuming some levels of the EPA and DHA fatty acids, because we don't want to solely rely on our body's mechanism to create it. It's better to consume it in our diet if we can. So we'll flip the slide here. In terms of the sources of where we can get omega-3, of course, one of the common things that people always say is, well, you eat your fish and seafood, but if you're following a vegetarian or vegan diet, you likely can't do that. So for vegetarians, often some animal products can be sometimes fortified with omega-3, but not always. So like, for example, eggs, you can find omega-3 fortified eggs, but the typical egg that you would just buy in the grocery store, the regular egg, is not going to be fortified. So you have to actually look out for it. And same thing with yogurt and milk. Sometimes you can find it, but you do have to actually look and make sure that it says that it is, if that's something that you're hoping to find, because it isn't just in your regular milk or eggs or yogurt. And then if you're a vegan or a vegetarian, there's also lots of non-meat or non-animal sources of omega-3 that you can try to focus on to try to make sure that you're getting at least some from your diet. So plant oils are where you're going to get your ALA, your ALA. So flaxseed oil, soybean oil, and canola oil, as well as in nuts and seeds, because they also have those types of plant oils just within the seed or the nut itself. And we can also get omega-3s from algae, kelp, and seaweed. So for example, I'm from Nova Scotia, I'm here in Halifax, and dulse is really quite common to eat as a snack. It's basically like a crispy salted seaweed, and lots of people really love it. So if you have access to that, I don't think it's as common in other provinces, but that would be another way you could consume extra omega-3s. And you can also find other fortified products, for example, certain beverages like soy beverages and fortified margarine. So margarine's another one that you would kind of have to look out for. It would say omega-3 on the label, and you could get extra from that. And Cameron, it looks like you've said that Costco has dulse. I assume you're talking about dulse. So there you go. I guess if you live elsewhere in the province, you can get it at Costco. We usually just get it at our local farmers market, but Costco is a great resource if it's not as common in your province. So there you go. Hopefully you can all give dulse a try. It's a bit of a weird experience, but you kind of grow to like it eventually. Oh, not dulse, but seaweed snack. Okay, so seaweed, kind of the same thing. You're going to get the same omega-3s from it. Okay. So spirulina and chlorella, that's a really good question. I honestly don't know for those ones whether or not they have omega-3. I can do a really quick look though. Let's see. It looks like they probably do. Yeah, so it says spirulina does, so I assume it would be the same for chlorella. So yeah, those are, I mean, again, it's like basically if it comes from the sea, your algae, your kelp, your seaweed, those types of things, similar to those that you've just mentioned, if it comes from the sea, then it probably does have some levels of omega-3 if it's kind of falling in that category. So that's definitely another option if you want to get a little bit of extra omega-3. Okay, so here's our requirements. EPA and DHA, we want to aim to get approximately 200 to 500 milligrams a day for men and women, and ALA is 1,600 milligrams a day. So keeping in mind that if you're a vegetarian or vegan, you probably are getting plenty of ALA because you're eating lots of plants, and plants have lots of oils, and so you're getting those plant oils pretty easily in your diet because you're consuming probably even more plants than someone who's not following a vegetarian or vegan diet. So you should be good there. But where the concern starts to come in is for your EPA and DHA. So whether or not you need a supplement, again, I feel like I'm kind of a broken record when I'm talking about these, but in general, it is possible that you may need an omega-3 supplement if you're following a vegetarian or vegan diet, especially if you're not eating fish. So it may be something you want to consider. Again, with the concern about, well, where is the omega-3 coming from? So similar to the B12, you have to make sure that your supplement is actually labeled as vegetarian or vegan if that's something that you're concerned about. And if it is vegetarian or vegan, then it would probably be made from algae. That's the most likely way that they would make it instead of getting it from fish. So you can buy omega-3 fish oil supplements, but if you're a vegetarian or vegan, then you would not want to be consuming those very likely because that is considered an animal product. So instead you would buy omega-3 that's labeled as vegetarian, and that would come from algae. But again, always talk to your healthcare provider before starting supplementation if you think that you're not getting enough from some of those sources that we've just discussed. All right, and last one. Oh, we're doing pretty good. We're still just under an hour here. So calcium and vitamin D is our last category. So calcium is a mineral, and it helps to build our bones. It helps to clot our blood. It helps our heart beat properly, and it helps to contract our muscles. So lots of really important roles for calcium. And vitamin D is a mineral, or sorry, no, calcium is a mineral, vitamin D is a vitamin that helps your body to absorb calcium to support bone building. So it has many other roles too, but in this case, I really want to focus on this bone building function that they kind of do together. So you need vitamin D to help absorb your calcium, and you need calcium to have healthy, strong bones. So where this becomes an issue for vegan or vegetarian diets is that calcium is most commonly found in dairy products. And if you're not consuming any animal products on a vegan diet, then you're probably not getting very much calcium without your dairy products. And the other issue is that vitamin D is naturally found in actually very few foods. So even for someone who's not a vegan or vegetarian, it can be difficult to get enough vitamin D. But hopefully everyone already knows that there's another way that we can get vitamin D. And it's a natural way that we can do that, which is from the sun. So we do have the ability to convert sunlight into vitamin D in our body, which is really great because it can be difficult to find in your food. So here's some sources of calcium, and then we'll do vitamin D. So calcium comes, like I said, in your dairy products, cow's milk, yogurt, and cheese. But if you're vegan and you don't consume those, you can still get calcium in lots of vegetables. Typically, your really leafy green vegetables have kind of the most levels of vitamin E. So as you can see pictured here, we've got broccoli, beans, kale, bok choy, spinach, all kinds of really great vegetables that have vitamin D. Some fruits as well. Fortified beverages, so soy beverages often would be fortified with calcium, and as well your cereals and snacks that are fortified fairly often with calcium in addition. So here we go, vitamin D. So similar thing, we could eat eggs. They do have some vitamin D naturally. Fish and beef liver are really the main natural sources of vitamin D. So other than eggs, you're going to get your vitamin D from animal products, and that's pretty much it. But the good news is that we do fortify a lot of our dairy products with vitamin D, and that's because we know that we need both in order to have healthy bones, because vitamin D is required in order to absorb calcium. So if we're drinking milk and we're getting lots of calcium, but we're not getting enough vitamin D, then that's not going to be really helpful. So because of that, in Canada, we've decided to fortify all of our dairy products with vitamin D. So you should be able to get some from those if you're a vegetarian that's consuming dairy products. If you're a vegan, probably the number one way for really all of us to be able to get sunlight is to get vitamin D is through the sunlight. And I see someone said 15 minutes a day, 3 days a week. That's pretty typical in order to get your maximum dose of vitamin D. So yeah, it's pretty easy to do. However, some people are sometimes a little bit concerned about sunburn, and unfortunately, wearing sunscreen does inhibit your absorption of vitamin D a little bit. So you're going to get less of it if you're wearing sunscreen. So that can be. Oh, I see that actually someone just asked that too there. And I do know there's a few questions up there as well. I'm going to go back to them, but I'm just finishing off this section. But yeah, to answer your question, Cameron, it does prevent it a little bit. So you're still going to get some, but it does have an effect where you're probably going to absorb less than you normally would without sunscreen. So if you're concerned about getting a sunburn, but you're also wanting enough vitamin D, it can be a bit of a tricky balance. So because of that, there's also a few other things that we fortified for the vegans in the group. So orange juice, soy milk, cereals, and margarine are some examples of foods that are fortified with vitamin D fairly regularly. So again, you would want to look on the label for some of these things because they're not always For example, vitamin D, it would actually say on the orange juice label, for example, that it has vitamin D in it. So your typical orange juice may not have it, but if it says that it does, then those are the ones that you would get that are fortified. All right, so requirements. Calcium, we need 1,000 milligrams a day, and vitamin D, we need 15 milligrams a day. So in order to try to make sure that we are getting enough, it's possible that you may require a supplement, but again, we want to try to focus on food and potentially sunlight in the case of vitamin D. But if you struggle to consume enough or to get enough sunlight exposure, which can be difficult for us Canadians in the winter because we don't have a whole lot of sunlight hours, especially if you're working 9 to 5. So sometimes people will supplement vitamin D only in the winter and not worry about it in the summer because they're exposed to the sun a little bit more. So that's really kind of up to you, but I would recommend you talk to a healthcare provider, as always, before you start either calcium or vitamin D. Often they do come together. So this one, for example, has both in it, but you can also buy them separately if you're only worried about one or the other. So just so that you're aware of that. Okay, I think I saw, so there was a question about B12. The body stores this vitamin and it can come up to years to notice a deficiency. Yes, that's a really good point. I'm really glad you brought that up, actually. So kind of jumping back to vitamin B, it is very true that the body has the ability to store B12 for very long amounts of time, and it can be several years. So you may not realize that you're deficient in it until you eventually run out of your stores, and you may notice that you're kind of feeling a bit sluggish and tired, and absolutely that may be the reason. So it may be something to look into. So thank you, David, for pointing that out. That's a really good point. Okay. All right, so that is all 5 of our categories for different things to focus on when you're trying to get enough nutrients on a vegetarian or vegan diet. So here are some additional tips if you're trying to eat more plants. And it's important to remember that you do not have to be a full-on vegetarian or vegan to still get the health benefits from eating enough plants. We can all benefit from eating more plants, and that's kind of the idea that's presented in Canada's Food Guide. It's not that we have to all stop eating meat. Certainly it's fine to eat meat, especially if it's something you enjoy and you feel that you want to include in your diet, but it's also fine to follow a vegetarian or vegan diet. It's really a very personal choice, and there's a lot of reasons why people choose one or the other. So we won't get into all of that, but just know that the more plant proteins that you eat, you will still get a good chunk of the benefits that we talked about in the beginning of this presentation. So if you're not one that typically eats plant-based proteins fairly often, then it's a good idea to gradually introduce more plants. I wouldn't really want anyone to just decide that they're going to wake up tomorrow and all of a sudden be a vegetarian. That can be very difficult because it is a big learning curve. So perhaps trying to do a plant-based meal, once a week, or have one day a week that you don't eat animal products. Often people will call it Meatless Monday, for example. So you pick, Monday as your day and you don't have any meat on Monday. So that's perfectly fine. I see Don has said that you're still trying to convince your family that they're okay. Maybe they can watch this presentation and they can see that it is okay. Definitely, especially once a week, like there's really nothing to worry about. All of those vitamins and minerals and nutrients that we just talked about, if you're eating meat and animal products every other day except for one day, then you're definitely gonna have no problem getting those. So you have much less to worry about in terms of making sure you get all your essential nutrients if you're eating both plants and animals. So doing it once or twice or even 3 times a week and working your way up and just having fun with it and saying, how can I include more plants in my diet? And you can even do a meal where you have both, right? You can have a nice plant protein source, but also include some animal protein. For example, you could make a stir fry that has both chicken and tofu, and you kind of do half and half. So that way you're eating less of the animal meat, if that's something you're working towards, but you're also getting to try a new type of plant-based protein. So those are some really great strategies to try. Also really important to make sure that you're eating a variety of foods. We've talked a lot about the different types of plant-based proteins in this presentation. There's so many, lots of fun things that you can try out. So really try to include a variety to make sure that you're not missing out on any of the important nutrients. The more variety you have, the more chance it is that that you have a balanced diet and that you're getting all of the nutrients that you need. And remembering that just because food is vegetarian or vegan, it isn't necessarily healthy. So trying to focus on whole foods is always a good recommendation, and acknowledging that the processed vegetarian or vegan foods may not be necessarily a better choice than eating meat. So keeping that in mind is a really good tip. Let's see, we have a comment here from Cameron and Dave. I think there's a new one from David here. Okay, so David says, likewise, if you are a vegetarian for a while and are transitioning back into eating meat, then do so gradually. The absence of meat causes the body to stop creating the enzymes required to break it down properly, which could result in an upset stomach. Yeah, so that's a good point. It's always good to do any sort of dietary transition gradually. You don't want to shock your body. And there can be really negative side effects if you do that. So that's a really good point. It's kind of, it goes both ways. You want to always make sure you do it gradually if you're making any sort of huge change. And Cameron, we have a comment here. This webinar has been great with a lot of technical information. How do I put it all together? Can you provide with a simple, easy to prepare vegetarian or vegan recipe? And what are other links for recipes that you recommend? Okay. That's a really great question as well, Cameron. I don't have any right this second that I can pull up, but at the end of this presentation, I'll hang on the line and you can do that as well, and anyone else who's interested, and I can pull together a few of my favorite links if you're curious. And you can kind of follow along for that at the end. I'll take a few moments to just pull a few things together. And Brenda here is recommending Oshi Glows. That's a really great one, and I think there's a cookbook that I believe I actually have it, and I've made some recipes from the Oshi Glows cookbook, and there is a great website that goes along with it. They're really, really tasty recipes, and it can be fun to play around with eating more vegetarian and vegan meals. And wine is vegetarian. Yes, it is, absolutely. That kind of goes along with the whole fact that, just because it's not, that it is vegetarian, it doesn't always mean it's healthy, but there's nothing wrong with, enjoying a glass of wine every now and then. And definitely dark chocolate is always a good pairing as well. So that would be great. Okay, let's see. Oh, she's Canadian. Oh, okay, good. That's good to know. Vegan Caesar salad. That does sound yummy. Is that from the Oshi Glows cookbook? I assume it must be. Okay, great. Wonderful. Thank you for all of those comments. That's great. Okay, so we're going to do our 2 polls, and then that way, once we're done that, anyone who is ready to leave can do so, and anyone who wants to stick around for a few more questions and I can send you some links, then we can do that afterwards. So here we go. First of all, I want to know whether or not you can apply what you learned in your daily living, and if you feel like what you learned was useful. So we're going to do that one. It should be live now. Strongly disagree is at the top. Strongly agree is at the bottom. All right. And then we have one more as well, once everyone has answered that. How satisfied are you with the Demio platform? So that's the platform that we've been using for this webinar. If you had any issues with it, then this is kind of your opportunity to let us know so that we can be aware of whether or not it's glitching or anything like that. Okay, I'm gonna pop back on here for a minute. So that's pretty well it. Here's some resources if anyone is curious about. There's lots of resources that are available to you guys as people who are affiliated with the military. So lots of phone numbers, websites that you can access if you're looking for help or support or information. So these are always there. You can feel free to take a picture of this slide if you want, because then you won't lose the information. So I'll give you a second if you want to do that. Pop back over here to the chat. I've got a few questions. Okay. So that's really it from me there. If there are any more questions, feel free to ask them now. If you're done asking questions, then thank you so much for joining. I will go back a slide for the resources there, Cameron. And feel free to sign off now unless you're interested in sticking around for some additional information. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining. Really appreciate it. That was a great afternoon, and hopefully we'll see you again soon. I am doing my next webinar next week on the topic of food marketing. So look for that one if you're interested in signing up for that. And maybe we'll see you next week. Okay, so let's go back up here. For those of you who are still present, I think we had a few questions. Just want to, okay, so we're gonna do a few recipe websites. I can do that for sure. We have a question from David about DFit. Honestly, I have no idea. I do not know much about that. So I do not know if they're gonna develop vegetarian meal plans. That is not in my wheelhouse. So as health promotion, we aren't really involved in doing meal plans or anything to do with DFit. So that's really not a question that I have the ability to answer, but definitely it would be nice if they did. So hopefully that's something that they're planning to expand upon in the future. Okay. Anyone else have any questions? Okay, wonderful. So I'm just going to take a moment here to put together a few resources. Again, these are just ones that I have off the top of my head. There's lots out there that you can find yourself, and I'm by no means endorsing any given website or anything like that. These are just some that I can think of right off the top of my head right now. So I'll go ahead and find a few of those, send some links for those of you who are interested, and then that should be really it. Okay. Okay, here we go. So, hi everyone. Looks like we've still got 10 of you. All right, so I've got two resources that I kind of thought of right away. So the first one is called Cookspiration. So this one is a website designed by Dietitians of Canada. So it's a really, really well-made, reliable source. And once you're on that website, if you scroll down and you click the little eyeball and it says explore by genre, then there's a genre for vegetarian and one for vegan. So you can look at both of those sections, and there's some really nice, fun recipes under that website. And then during my protein webinar, I sent this link as well. So this is actually a good friend of mine who's a registered dietitian who owns a private practice. She's based out of Toronto, although she's originally from Halifax. And we went through our Masters of Public Health together. So she is a great resource. I love following her stuff. She has an Instagram account also called Tasting to Thrive. That's kind of the name of her business. And then that's her website there that I sent you the link. You should be able to find her on all of the social medias just by searching for Tasting to Thrive. Her name is Lauren McNeil, and she is kind of an expert in plant-based nutrition. So she has, I think, some online courses that you can take. You would pay for those ones, of course, through her, but they are really great from what I've seen. I've never taken them myself, but I know that she's a really well-educated and knowledgeable dietitian, and I definitely trust her advice. So if you're interested in doing more learning in plant-based nutrition, that would be a really great place to start too. She has a blog, so there's lots of articles on her website where you can read all about vegan and vegetarianism, and her Instagram is a really great place where she sends out lots of recipes that she tests and makes herself. So if you're interested, check her out as well. Again, she's just a friend of mine, and it kind of just popped in my head. I'm in no way like endorsing her her business or anything like that, but it is just something that I have been aware of as a resource. So feel free to use that if you want. There's lots of other great dietitians out there that work in the same area. So also feel free to do your own research and take a look for other resources and dietitians. I would recommend that anything that you're looking at with regards to nutrition and diet, I would hope that you would all try to make sure that it's always coming from a dietitian, because we are, of course, the ones that are trained the most in food and nutrition and diet. So it's kind of the most reliable place that you can get your information is from a dietitian. So those two sources that I just sent you, they're both dietitian approved. And I'd encourage you to continue to make sure that all of your nutrition information comes from a dietitian and not someone without the necessary qualifications to be able to talk adequately about these topics, because it is very complicated. So hopefully that helps. Let me know if there's any other questions. I see there's something here from Julia. Professional development for the cooks. Yeah, that's a really good point. Unfortunately, it's a slow process. We do actually work with the cooks in the messes and such, and we do try to have our influence in the types of meals that are served. We've made some improvements for sure in Halifax in the cafeterias and messes, so that's been some really great improvements, but it is a slow process. So hopefully we'll continue to work in the right direction. And I see there's also a question here from Cameron about the difference between a dietitian and a nutritionist, which is a really great question, a very common one. So the answer is kind of that it depends. So in Nova Scotia, both terms are protected. So I would be both a dietitian and a nutritionist. However, in Ontario and several other provinces, there is a big difference because the term nutritionist is not protected in all provinces. I think there are a couple other provinces that have it protected other than Nova Scotia. I think maybe BC and maybe one or two others. I can't remember exactly, but I know for sure Nova Scotia it is. And in Ontario, it is not. So that means that anyone off the street could just put a name tag that says that they're a nutritionist on their door and pretend that they're an expert in nutrition, even though they're not. So usually dietitian is kind of the term that we use, since it's protected pretty much everywhere, and nutritionist is not. So that means that in Nova Scotia, you're not allowed to use either, but in Ontario, you could, even if you're not trained in nutrition. So that's kind of the difference. Yeah, hopefully for the most part, it should be a dietitian. But if they're calling themselves a nutritionist, then they may have the right training. It just depends on their province. And you're asking about the webinar for next week. Yeah, so I can actually probably send you a link if you're interested. The topic is food marketing, which is really fun. I love talking about food marketing. So if I do events, I'm just going to get the link here so that you can register if you want to. Let's see. I think I can. Yeah, I can find it. 1 second. If you want to hang around for the link, then you can. If not, then don't feel like you have to wait. I'll just grab it here for a second. Okay, webinars. They all have their own unique link, so I need to make sure I grab the right one here. Okay. Here we go. Wonderful. All right, I'll copy and paste that there for you. So yeah, it's food marketing. I think it's Wednesday at 11:30 Eastern. That's the schedule for that one. And we also have another comment here from Cameron. The relationship between veganism, plant-based eating versus masculinity. It's a really good point. Absolutely. It's a really deep-seated issue, I think, in our society that, you know, eating meat is manly and barbecuing meat is manly. So it is an interesting issue, and I definitely think we need to continue to work against those types of stereotypes, but it's definitely to everyone's benefit to eat more plants whenever possible, even if you're still eating meat. And don't apologize for commenting at all. I love to have that engagement. It makes it a lot more interesting for everyone. So thank you for participating. I do really appreciate that. Okay, so I guess that's pretty much it. Unless there's any of you that are lingering that have any other questions, I'll stick around for a few more minutes. And feel free to jump in and ask if you have anything. But other than that, again, thank you so much for joining me today. The link there is there for my next webinar next week on Wednesday. I'd love to see you back here. That would be great. Food marketing is a really fun topic. We'll talk about all kinds of the different ways that businesses advertise their food to make you want to buy it, which is a really interesting and relevant topic these days. So hopefully we'll see you there. Thank you so much, everyone.